Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving straight into a totally harrowing, real-life medical mystery. It happened to a woman named Madame Ho. And guys, this is a gripping story. It's all about invisible pain, some massive red herrings, and a brutal 3.5-month journey that's going to completely change how you view routine medical diagnoses. Like so many of us probably would, Madame Ho initially just brushed off her sudden discomfort. In her own words, she said, "I thought it was just frozen shoulder, but it was a disease easily missed." She just figured, hey, I probably pushed myself a little bit too hard doing Pilates the day before. Nothing major, right? But that brings us to a genuinely terrifying question. What happens when your pain is actually a symptom of something way, way deeper? We're going to treat her story like a high-stakes detective case today. Because for Madame Ho, the most obvious answers were entirely and terrifyingly wrong. Section 1, the initial warning signs. So things escalated with terrifying speed. On March 25th, Madame Ho woke up and literally couldn't raise her arms. Fast forward less than 2 months later to May 20th, and she collapsed. By June 4th, temporary blindness struck. It wasn't until July 9th that she finally got the real diagnosis. It was just 3.5 months, but honestly, that's a lifetime of anxiety. Let's break down exactly how this happened. Now, Madame Ho was actually incredibly proactive. She'd had this interest in rheumatology since her student days, so she went straight to her doctor and got a blood test for RF, which is rheumatoid factor. And when that test came back negative, she breathed this massive sigh of relief. She assumed her inability to lift her arms was just a localized issue, maybe a frozen shoulder or severe soreness from working out. But here's the catch. This negative RF test was a massive red herring. It gave her a false sense of security, basically tricking her into believing she didn't have a systemic inflammation issue. Section 2. Getting worse, not better. Believing it was just a standard orthopedic issue, she threw every localized treatment at it. We're talking occupational therapy, physical therapy, massages, and eventually even cervical nerve blocks. But the result? Absolutely zero relief. In fact, the more she went to rehab, the worse the pain got. Her treatments were completely failing simply because they were targeting her shoulder, not the actual disease that was quietly raging inside of her. The physical and emotional toll here was just devastating. By May 20th, the whole body muscle pain was so unbearable, she couldn't even stand up from a chair. She was completely drained of all her strength. She literally had to cry out for her husband just to help her get to her feet. So in sheer desperation, she called her orthopedic doctor, who prescribed a 2-week course of steroids, and man, it felt like a miracle. The symptoms practically vanished overnight. But, as we're going to see, this was really just a temporary Band-Aid. Section 3, the medical blind spot. Okay, so just 2 days after those steroids ran out, the real terror began. At 5 a.m. on June 4th, Madame Ho woke up feeling incredibly dizzy. She gets up to use the restroom, rubs her eyes, and suddenly realizes her right eye is completely dark. Sudden temporary blindness. Obviously, she wakes her husband in an absolute panic, and they rush straight to the emergency room. Now, the ER doctors were heroic. They immediately sprang into action with ECGs, MRIs, MRAs, CT scans, the whole shebang. Their medical assumption, they firmly believed she was having a stroke or a TI, which is a transient ischemic attack. But the test results came back showing her brain was perfectly normal. They literally spent the entire day trying to save her brain from a stroke, completely missing the actual culprit. But here's the crazy part. During all those frantic ER tests, they ran routine blood work, and hidden right there in that data was a glaring clue. The number 88. That was her ESR, which is a really vital marker for inflammation. A normal ESR is quite low, but hers was sky high. Yet because every single doctor was so laser-focused on ruling out a stroke, this massive blazing red flag was completely ignored in all the chaos. Section 4, diagnosis and relief. So after a whole month of living in the dark, both literally and figuratively, Madame Ho went to a local eye doctor on July 9th for a follow-up about her vision. She brought all her paperwork and ER data with her. The eye doctor takes one look at the paperwork, spots that forgotten number, and says, ESR is 88? This is systemic inflammation. You need a rheumatologist immediately. He didn't even wait around. He had his staff call a specialist right then and there, and somehow they secured her a 2:30 p.m. appointment that very same afternoon. The rheumatologist looked at her symptoms, looked at that ESR of 88, and immediately gave her the answer she'd been desperately seeking for over 100 days. She had PMR, or polymyalgia rheumatica. This is a condition involving widespread systemic inflammation that causes severe muscle pain and weakness. This is exactly why her whole body ached. It's why her arms were stuck. It was never a frozen shoulder to begin with. But wait, what about the temporary blindness, right? Well, the rheumatologist explained she was also suffering from GCA, which stands for giant cell arteritis. This is a super dangerous complication that's closely related to PMR. It causes inflammation of the arteries, particularly near the temples, which essentially cuts off blood flow to the eyes. If left untreated, it can cause permanent blindness. Finally, every single puzzle piece fit perfectly together. Section 5, Your Health Toolkit. Madam Ho's ordeal leaves us with 3 absolute golden rules to put in your health toolkit. First, a negative RF test does not rule out PMR. Remember that red herring from earlier? Don't let it be yours. Second, beware of pain that actually gets worse with local treatments. If physical therapy or nerve blocks are making you feel worse, you really need to suspect a full-body issue. And third, always advocate for yourself and explicitly request ESR and CRP blood tests. Let me repeat those. ESR and CRP. These are the 2 vital blood tests for uncovering hidden systemic inflammation. If you ever go to your doctor with unexplained widespread pain, you need to explicitly ask for these by name. Just knowing this one simple fact can literally change your entire future and save you months of agonizing misdiagnosis. So if your pain isn't getting better, is it time to look beyond the surface? I think Madam Ho's story teaches us that even incredible, well-meaning doctors can have blind spots. You have to be the CEO of your own health. Question the obvious, look for the systemic, and honestly, never stop advocating for yourself until you find the real answer. Thanks so much for exploring this case with me in this explainer. Remember to keep learning and stay curious.